Still Here presents Juggling Joy, an intimate evening with Tanea Lunsford Lynx. My name is Natalia Vigil, and I'm the co-founder of Still Here San Francisco. Still Here, founded in 2012, is an intergenerational cultural preservation project amplifying the voices and creativity of LGBTQIA, Two-Spirit Plus, BIPOC artists raised in San Francisco. As people to which the land we call San Francisco holds importance, we acknowledge this as the traditional land of the Ohlone people of Chichui Village. We pay respect to the elders, both past and present, who stewarded the land throughout generations, and to the Ohlone people of today, for which this land is home. Still Here Presents is born from the desire to take a more intimate look at the lives and work of Still Here artists. When the series was proposed, we didn't know how profound it would be to be in conversations like this during this particular time in history. Thank you to our supporters, to the California Arts Council, to San Francisco Arts Commission, to Amanda Vigil for running tech, and to the community for your support. Now it's my absolute honor to introduce you to Tanea Lunsford Lynx. Welcome, Tanea.
Hi, Nati.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing good. Happy 415 Day.
Happy 415 Day. Yes.
Tanea is a writer, educator, abolitionist, and fourth generation Black San Franciscan on both sides. Tanea, we met in 2016 when you answered an open call to be part of Still Here's displacement show, and you've become a beloved part of Still Here. You've curated the 2018 show Existence as Resistance, Black, Queer, and Still Here, and you lead the ongoing Existence as Resistance work. You co-led Still Here Writes, a 2-month-long writing workshop with me, and your work's published in Still Here San Francisco's anthology, which is still available by Foglifter Press. And I encourage everyone to check out Tanea's website and to also see all the wonderful things that they've done.
Thank you.
So when we're talking about today, it was important and kind of fun for us to think of making this event on April 15th, 415 Day. And so in that spirit of the 415 and all of our ancestors before us, and in honor of memory, we thought we'd take some time to talk about all the things that we miss.
Oof. So many things. So many things. So thinking about old San Francisco, the San Francisco that I grew up in and what I miss from this place. So much my memory and what I miss is braided in with being young. So that sense of nostalgia sometimes it's kind of tied together. But you know how much I miss the 26 bus. I talk about it all the time. It was such a good ride. I miss knowing all of my neighbors and like the hotline of if something was going on, just like calling each other and being like, are you watching this? Are you seeing this? Now the relationship between neighbors is really different. A lot of us don't all know each other. What about you? What do you miss?
I really miss Blondie's downtown. My sisters and I used to be able to just pop down and get some pizza while we were shopping. And I really miss listening to CDs at Amoeba Record. That was like such the thing. And just waiting for CDs to come out.
Yes.
I know we talked about this, but we really miss the old color Muni. The like.
Yeah, I remember that moment of just seeing a train pass by my block and being like, what is that? What is this? What is this silver? So yeah, the orange. I miss the orange too.
What is this beauty metro?
Right.
Cable car pizza on Gary Street.
Yeah.
And then, I was thinking about things that I miss that are now just from this year, like It's Tops and Louise Cliff House and The Stud.
Ooh, yeah.
The Lex before that. I really loved King of Falafel. What else?
Yeah, Marcus Books.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right there on.
So there are a bajillion things I know that I miss about the city, and I'm curious what some of those things are that I'm missing.
There really are. Why don't you help us out in the chat and let us know what it is that you're missing in San Francisco? Before we go into sharing your first piece, I've been reminded of being in your writing workshops and your ritual of leading us in the creation of an altar every workshop. I'm wondering if you have something to share with us as a sort of virtual altar. And Tania and I welcome all of you who are watching to name your offering in the chat as well.
So whenever I am creating an altar space, I usually have water. I have a cup of water, a glass of water, a candle. I have my candle, which is lit. And then I have items that I love, items that remind me of resilience. And today I have a photo of my grandfather, my grandpa. This is my grandpa, Michael Sanders. I brought this photo to be a part of our collective altar because when I think about my grandpa, he was one of my first teachers and one of my favorite teachers. He taught me so much about life through his teachings, through appreciation for everything, through kind of grace and silliness, the value of silliness. He also taught me how to drive when I was really young, like way too young, out at Lake Merced. And so I bring him in the spirit of someone who I think is so much a part of San Francisco in the fabric of the city. He was a firefighter. And I learned the city through him, through driving, through his stories, through his experiences of the city, and through his teachings. And so I bring that photo of him today in that spirit that he's given me.
I brought some sage. I feel like I haven't had an altar that doesn't have sage. And, one of the most powerful things that our mom really taught me to do was actually to build an altar. And so even before like Dia de los Muertos was as popularized as it is today, it was something that we always did. And so I just feel like have that ritual was just so special for me. And especially as people did pass away when I was young. So I know that you have a piece to share with us in terms of speaking of altars and honoring people.
Yes. Yeah, so I have a piece. It's called All Gays Go to Heaven. It's about my Uncle Rodney, who passed away before I was born, but who I feel this really deep connection to, and his stories about him and his spirit and his livelihood. I just feel that he's so alive. And so I was inspired to write this piece, which is called All Gays Go to Heaven. And I've used gay because my Uncle Rodney identified as a gay man among some of his closest friends and chosen family and loved ones when he was alive. But he did live much of his life closeted, and being able to be out and gay among trusted people and community was really special to him. So during his lifetime, identities such as queer was still in the process of being reclaimed. And I'm not sure how he would identify himself if he were alive today, but it brings me much joy to think about it. Gays go to heaven. We passed each other under the veil. In heaven, he's doing backspins and practicing footwork to a house remix of Minnie Riperton's Inside My Love while smoking a joint intermittently. My Uncle Rodney died of AIDS-related illness exactly 4 months before I was born. But the truth is that he's also everywhere. He was his father's favorite son. Growing up, I didn't know much about my uncle except that he died early. As I got older, more truth began to be casually fed to me. Information is a rite of passage in my family. When I went to college, I was given more access to conversations that I'd never entered before. Every sentence about my Uncle Rodney seemed to start in the middle. He danced at the discos in North Beach until morning. Ultimately, he moved back into his parents' house with his boyfriend before he got sick. In his 20s, my Uncle Rodney married a woman, a friend of his mother's, who offered to pay for the marriage to help her citizenship. He had already been out as gay to many of his family and friends, but walked a cognitive dissonance line with his parents. To retain his title as favorite son, Rodney obliged his parents and legally married a woman. It was clear the two weren't a couple, but Rodney's parents tried to rewrite his legacy after his death. He was a geometry whiz and an intellectual, a trickster who replaced his father's Diet Coke with real Coke when he was angry with him. He was a nerd who threw tantrums when he got a 3.9 GPA. He grew weed in the windowsill of our family house in San Francisco's Lakeview, telling his mother that it was an experiment for school. At 5 years old, I began noticing my delight and confusion desiring other girls. Girl queerness was an oddity not discussed outside of Halloween and pride events in the Castro. I came out to my family a year after college. I didn't know how they would respond about my queerness when I moved back home. Homophobic language was a norm for certain households in my family. I came out like this. One day, I called my mother, shaking, asking for her advice. I began by saying I had a date, a lie, and needed help choosing an outfit, another lie. Like my Uncle Rodney, I've always been fabulous with an outfit. I went on to mention that my date was a woman. I said I needed more advice. About what? What's the issue? My stomach turned, thinking that maybe my mother hadn't heard me correctly. Well, I'm afraid about what Grandma will say about me dating a girl. This was not a complete lie, but it was my way of steering my mother toward the affirmation I needed from her. I knew that naming my fear of familial rejection would provoke fierce support from her, and I was in tears before we got off the phone. She said, "Don't let anybody tell you how to live your life. You make yourself happy. That's the most important. You're phenomenal and you deserve to be happy." I cried for a long time after hanging up. I've been building a home for myself in my own little queer heaven ever since. He had a smart mouth and a quick wit and a huge heart. When I learned about ancestral healing, it felt like I was offered a place to sit after running forever. I sat through the practice of ceremony, altar building, and prayer. Before learning about the practice, I'd always felt guided and protected, but I didn't have the understanding to extract meaning from situations that often left me feeling lucky and cursed, sensitive and psychic, crazy and weird. If he were still here, he'd be fighting for his rights. After my practice developed, I was called by spirit to visit my uncle's grave. He's buried beside his mother, my great-grandmother, his father, and his sister in a family plot near Half Moon Bay. When I arrived at the cemetery, I read the simple headstone marker from my Uncle Rodney. It said, "Beloved husband." I began to fume. I couldn't unwind the screws smoothed deep into the placard of the headstone. I sat for a long time at his grave, trying to fathom why his parents chose this marker for him. I was furious at the erasure of my uncle as a gay man. Were they ashamed of his queerness? Fearful of his fate as a gay man? Afraid he would go to hell because he was gay? Didn't they know all gays go to heaven? I'm working to create a place where we belong, even if it's just in this body at this moment, heaven. I hope Rodney has glimpses of his own heaven, wearing a handkerchief in his back pocket, finally leaning into the natural sway of his hips, sliding Vaseline across his lips, skipping down the back stairs 2 at a time to get to a party after everyone goes to bed, wrapping his arms around the necks of lovers. He feels it as I do now, draping my legs on the side of a wide-back chair, dancing in shorts and long socks to Shaka Khan in my living room, going outside in my suit and tie or my too short dress and forgetting my knife at home. It's all heaven. Each act of pleasure, madness, throat-exposed joy always allows me to see my Uncle Rodney more clearly in heaven, among all the other gays where he belongs, where none of us has to wait in the bathroom line, where the morning music greets us and our afros are even on all sides, and someone speaks in our register above the oblivious heads of the normative, offering us a corner-mouthed smile, a corner seat on the couch, their heavy head on our shoulder, and a sigh accented with love. Where the warm wind dries the sweat on our necks and the day unfolding feels like infinite possibility instead of labor again. Heaven is a second chance at living in joy. It's in the ethers, in the blood we share. Joy is our job. We do it and carry it for all of those who came before us, who couldn't in their lifetime. We made a pact when we crossed under the veil.
That was such an incredibly beautiful piece. Thank you for reading that and for honoring your Uncle Rodney. I've actually never heard that piece before. And so I feel really like kind of broken open. And, one of the questions I wanted to ask is, from all of the different pieces that you have, multimedia, which we're going to see later, poetry, nonfiction, and fiction, why did you decide to open with this piece? And why this piece now?
Yeah. I can't do anything without my ancestors. They're just so present. They're so here all the time. And they're my favorite reminder of my possibility in this lifetime, my possibility beyond this lifetime. And they're such a reminder of joy. I wrote that piece because I was longing for a relationship to grief that wasn't stale, a relationship to grief that had pockets of air and music and movement, because that's how I feel about my ancestors. That's how I feel about folks who have passed on. I'm so present with the lessons that they've given me. I'm so present with the love and support that they have for me. And I'm so clear about the ways that they're working in my life. It feels so good to me when I learn a lesson or I support other, especially my littles and my family. I can feel like the relief, the sigh of me gaining joy this lifetime. I feel very clear that the joy that I'm able to hold on to, grasp, like fully enjoy through my body is also experienced and shared with those who came before me. And I'm also clear that it benefits those who will come after me.
When we spoke before, you did talk a little bit about ancestors and what it means to miss a person, and how in missing that, you could think maybe they could have lived, maybe they could have gone older, and like a gratefulness for what they taught you. And then how in turn to take care with their altar. And again, we see this theme of how you've always created an altar. And I feel like your work to me really holds the reverence of an altar. Can you talk a little bit about what it means for you to create works about those in your life as a way to honor them, whether they're living or past?
Absolutely. Writing, when I'm writing, I feel like I'm tapping into a and there's grief in there, and there's joy in there, and there's longing in there, and there's admiration and all of those things. And when I can get into the flow of that channel, by appreciating a loved one who's passed or a loved one who's still here, it feels really good. It feels really good to me. I lost your question. And you're on mute.
You answered it, but it does go into my next question. So, which is, how are spirituality and art connected for you, if they are?
Yeah. So spirituality and art are really braided together for me. When I think about approaching the page, when I think about writing something down, it's a miracle. It's a miracle that I could write something down and I'm describing something as I'm seeing it. And then I can share that thing with you and you can see what I'm seeing. Although it looks different, you know, like the faces of folks might be different or the colors might be different or whatever it is, each of us has a relationship to these things. And so it feels like when I'm writing something down, I am allowing it to live in the imaginations of the collective, and I'm breathing life into it, and other folks are supporting me in that vision, because I'm seeing something so clearly, and I'm asking folks like, can you see this thing too? Like, you know, does this make sense to you? Have you also seen this thing? How does it look different to you, etc. And so to me, there's something so divine about writing and the worlds that we get to create when we write. And that's spiritual in its highest sense to me.
You shared a little bit with me about how writing for you, a writing practice has been like transmutation, transformation, and healing. And you've talked about how you're cataloging places that are no longer here and writing about people that are no longer here. And you do this in your work, but then you also open this up to other people. And so, in teaching and in writing groups, you're offering an invitation to help a group to process grief and to heal themselves through writing and time. Can you talk a little bit about how the process of grief and healing through time occurs for you and what it manifests?
Yeah, absolutely. It's important for me to remember what was here before. It's important for me to remember um, that I have intimate knowledge with things that may no longer be here, with places that may look different now. It's important for me to write that down. It's important for me to see it, to be able to visit with it, particularly in the context of San Francisco. When I think about that place that used to feel so Black to me, when I think about that place in those moments of growing up and the San Francisco that exists now, it feels like a violence that folks can't imagine what used to be so true to me. That this was a place that every block was kind of braided with the history and the stories and the voices of Black folks, Indigenous folks, and folks of color in the city. It feels like such a violence that we have to write these things down out of urgency, out of emergency, you know, because there's no evidence of them being here otherwise very often. As far as transmutation, yeah, it's all of my stuff is there. Writing is really that space where I can, without judgment, spill it all and then kind of weed and look through things that are connecting to bigger themes, things that might make more sense with time. But I'm writing to figure out how I'm feeling, and I'm writing to figure out what I think, and I'm writing to tell the truth, however small or partial or confusing, because I need to see it.
It's so wild that we feel that we need to kind of remind or convince people of like a city and a life that we knew,
Yeah.
you know, and that for in little pockets is still very real. I really think of you as a like an incredibly strong literary voice that holds the city and its legacy. And I know that your work is shaped by growing up Black and queer in San Francisco and in this society, and that your work like leads the way for witnessing what has been and what is left and what has survived. And we've had conversations talking about the world as it is now and like what we've come to inhabit in this last year, the possibilities, the change, the devastation, the transformation, and as you've come to name this night, the juggling of grief and joy. So I would love to hear from you what motivated you to name the show Juggling Grief and Joy, and also what it means for you now and how it shows up in your life or your work currently.
Yeah. So I used to experience grief as all consuming, really. It didn't feel like I had an option to feel other things. Grief would just come and kind of stay. And writing was my way of being with it in a way that allowed me to move within it, to describe it, its textures and tones, the love that was in there. And as I grew, as I got older, but especially as I went to therapy, I was able to notice, like, oh, there's a little bit of light in here. Like, oh, there's a little bit of like love in here. Oh, wait, okay. So it's not all gloom. There's so much love in here. There's so much joy in here. There's so much presence in here. So when I think about processing grief, moving through grief, writing down, visiting with grief, I think so much of it is juggling the joy with it, and giving reverence to those moments, those pockets of love and joy that are inevitably braided together.
Capital and broad. Grace grows generationally at the liquor store. My grandma was treated any old kind of way. My daddy ran the block. And my high school graduation photo is up and left of the Newports, between the plastic above the counter. One day on this corner, my father told my mother a joke. She covered her mouth to laugh, and I came out on the other end. Of course, this is not all there is, but this is where most of us is. Inside the house cursed with 3 generations of addiction, so my Nana sold it when my mother went to rehab. The new owners, knowing nothing about what to do during a raid, or what to do when your mother goes to rehab, or what to do about the remaining black neighbors, resold it for $1 million and still couldn't get the ghosts out. They added bars on the front windows and fixed the front gate, trying and failing to. Laundry and mambas, now laters and rhododendrons. The streetcar is changing colors again today. My cousin rolls up in his mother's squeaking car while I wait to see if inbound or outbound will round the corner. Like flipping a coin. Like shaking an 8-ball. Which way will I wrap my arms and grip the city today? I've watched the library become a blue paint-chipped void on the corner since I could read. I've watched the Pentecostal church become condos and still sing. I've forgotten about the house next door to ours. Was it green with smooth slats, or was it textured like goosebumps? And who was it who used to sit up on the windowsill, stretching out to the neighbor's landing, leaning slightly into the tiny gap between our 2 houses as a joke? I'm moving, whoever it was would say, as if they could lean just a bit more out of that window and start a new life next door. We would laugh. I've forgotten who was there laughing with me. The consonants in our names are being whispered through the low looping telephone wires, even after the security cameras are installed, and my picture is ripped down off of the plastic in the store and is replaced with a tax. My handprint is still in the concrete in front of our old house, and the park is still full of dirt from underneath my father's fingernails, even though they tried to ship him away. And the laundromat on the corner, it stays open late night whirring with the electricity from my great-grandmother's teeth grinding beyond the grave. Of course, this is not all there is, but this is us. This is ours. This is where most of us is.
I love how that piece really exemplifies what you were saying before, like not just talking about memory, but also really showing the now and showing people, showing your family, showing Black San Francisco. When I read your work or listen to your work, I feel like I'm traversing San Francisco, and I start to have my own memories, but I also get to see the city through your point of view and your life. So what was it like to create that piece with all of all of your family members? Like, how did they respond? What is it like for them to see your art or to hear your work?
So I created that piece while I was in Quacknap over a long weekend. And so from beginning to end, shooting, editing, I probably had 2 days to do it. But it was really special. I had written the poem already. Part of the poem is actually on the 3rd floor of the SF MoMA garage forever. So that's really, really special. But it was beautiful to be able to add a visual to what I was already seeing when I was creating the piece. And so to get them in, their homes over the weekend and to kind of, I need a moment. Let's see. Okay. So it was really special to be able to put a visual to what I was already seeing when I created the piece, and for it to live in a different way. Poems, when we write them on the page, they have a life on the page, they have a life when we read them, but they also have a different life when we can see them in action. And so it was really special to, show my sisters and show my nibbling and show some of my grandparents, and have that visual representation for us as a family. But it was also an important experiment for me to be thinking about what is normal for me, what is commonplace for me, and to have that reflected in my, choices of shots and thinking about editing and what I wanted to shoot and things like that. It occurred for me the first time, kind of watching back all of the what I had shot, that there was art featuring Black people all around me growing up, and it was normal. It was just on all the walls, and it was at all of our houses. And it wasn't until I started shooting and I was seeing these things in the background, I was like, that's always been there. I've always been surrounded by this, and it was really special to see all of these elements of my childhood just in the background of my family, and to have like my poem going on and to think like, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that that's always been there. I'm so grateful I get to honor these folks that have always created opportunities for me to see myself, even if it was just in the background.
Place specifically San Francisco feels like a character in your work, and in everything that you do. And in this piece specifically, you'd speak to the fact that there's only 3% of Black residents left in San Francisco. And you are actually a fourth generation Black San Franciscan. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what it means for you to be fourth generation here in this city. There aren't many of us that can say that.
Yeah. San Francisco is absolutely a character. A character in my life, in my writing. This city has so many different kind of mercurial qualities, from the fog to its outward perception, for like visitors and tourists, to its sweet moments of warm weather at weird times of the year, to weird times of day and in different places and in different customs that are specific to this place. But in all of its complexity, my family has experienced the beauty of San Francisco, but also its harshness. I grew up as a person who's a child of an incarcerated parent, and so I knew the kind of joyous parts of the city with its festivals and its hills and its landscapes and all those things, but also knew the insides of all the local jails. And that is the experience of many Black San Franciscans. So there's an estimated 3 to 5% of Black folks left in San Francisco, but in 2017, Black folks were more than 56% of the population in jails in San Francisco. And so when I think about criminalization and when I think about targeting and displacement and state violence, San Francisco is a place where all of that beauty and possibility is side by side with so much violence and so much erasure. And that is something that my family experienced for 4 generations. My great-grandmother on my father's side migrated up from Texas, Port Arthur, Texas. And on my mom's side, my great-grandmother came from the Philippines. She was Afro-Filipina. And it's so strange, the kind of like family coincidences. Like both sides of my family ended up landing in San Francisco within a few years of each other, in different parts of the city, but all related to kind of the naval yards and water. And then my parents grew up in Lakeview within 4 blocks of each other.
Wow.
Like 3 generations later. So there's so much magic. There's so much of my family's magic that's in everything that I see in the city.
One of the things that I loved about the Existence as Resistance show was seeing all of the artists get together and talk about how closely connected geographically your family members were.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something that can happen with BIPOC folks in San Francisco. And it's like, there's just this way where, on one hand, I don't think people understand what it takes to stay in the city, and not because people don't want to, but because of everything that you're talking about. But then when you get people together, there's someone's grandma up the street. That's where you went to that school, or your best friend. And it's just this beautiful, like interconnected web. And I think there's a way in which, as still here folks, or people who are born and or raised here, there's like this kind of fight in us that looks really different than it can for other people.
Yeah.
So we're actually going to share a video from your 2018 show, and the piece is called, in this video, it's called Still Here.
All right, I'm so grateful to be here with y'all. I wrote this piece in reflection of my learnings in the practice of the healing power of silliness and story, and the practice of not blaming myself for all the heartache in the world. It's my favorite. It's called Still Here. Can y'all hear me okay?
No.
Okay, I should my mask, I'm sorry.
I don't think the mic's on.
I used to live here. I used to live here. My whole hood is a museum now. And my whole city is a playground with rules against me. This used to be a good place for a young witch to practice raising hell with two small hands. A place for getting on the back of the bus without paying and still feeling dignified about shouting, back door.
Yes!
I see some very Asian folks in the crowd. This used to be a good place to be open. To hide from the two rough fingers of the world under thick fog until you caught your breath and could run again. Or so I'm told. By the time we got here 4 generations ago, all the good hiding spots for catching your breath were taken or you wasn't allowed to buy. You used to be able to find a lost auntie in the TLs who told good stories and forgot whose secrets were whose. You used to could dream about life as a lowrider and a black cowboy here. My mama didn't speak Spanish, but sometimes she wasn't talking to Pepe's mama because Pepe's mama, who we all thought was Selena, reborn, took our clothes out of the dryer when she was impatient. And sometimes they was best friends on late Sunday night washes. You used to could have little baby dreams and get the best directions from a man nodding off while standing up. You used to could get your fortune told by the man in front of the liquor store who had been revived from death twice for the price of 1 loose Newport. You used to be able to have all hands on deck after watching a loved one fall off the wagon again and again. My grandmother used to lean over to the left side in a chair using her right hand to rub huge circles on her hip when rain was coming. My grandmother who burped when she was feeling anxious. You used to be able to have a grandmother here. I'm 17 years old. With me and my boo have matching Jordans and matching North Faces zipped up to our chins. We kick out the red stop request signs on the M train and put them on a necklace and wear them like a prize. The first time going into the tunnel at West Portal, I thought I was so big, I crouched my neck into my shoulders so as not to bump my head. And I was transformed into someone who was from here. There is an entire microcosm of a dark world ruled by second-grade teachers in the tunnels between West Portal and Venice Station. I have seen it with my own eyes. There's not even a Blondie's downtown anymore. Where are all the black and brown children in this city? Somewhere being treated like extinction. They dug up our bones when they turned over the dirt in the projects where Anthony's granny used to live. It's a high-rise now, with the best views any building built on black bones could build, or so they say. They won't let me up to see the view. My head fell off while running for the 54 again today. It's an anniversary. I remember missing the bus like this when I went home to my great-grandmother, our famous mustard seed. She sewed my head back onto my neck again and sang me her famous mustard seed song called Bro, You Ain't Got No Options. She sang it in the soprano falsetto voice, the one in the key of this house just won't burn down, will it? The one in the pitch of tired 24-hour Safeway light. And it was soothing. Besides having 2 girlfriends, both named Monique, with several children, each. My father assures me that I am the cutest cute that ever cuted. Until one day I am 9, and I get my hair relaxed, and my thick locks become a whisper in the shadow of what they used to be, and my head feels too light. Without saying so with his mouth, I have become an adult, and he stops picking me up on Saturdays. I used to live here. Several leagues beneath the sand and sea at Ocean Beach, where people are burning out fog machines to keep the attraction going. There's another layer of alternate reality, a universe where I can't find parking anywhere in the Mission. And the light goes out at my grandmother's old house, but none of us live there anymore. And the house with our multi-generational miracle in it is nearly up to $1 million on Zillow, tumbling profit as it gets bought and sold every year. And I see people whose singing voices made me cry with joy laying in the street with no shoes on. And I'm losing teeth in all of my dreams. I used to live here. Before my sister had the baby and summer returned in September in time to celebrate, when Cesar Chavez was Army Street and I only knew one Potrero Hill and there was no pizza or dog walking there. Or no bun. When we couldn't be queer, so we had to be really excited about our Halloween from couch shows. When the Metreon was still new and the fast life of Yerba Buena Gardens was the top of the world, and downtown was a Friday night activity brought to you in part by a long paper transfer or a pass with a Y on it. I know hood and hippie talk. I know ain't, I know hyphy and gumbo. I know that you don't have to get out of the car to enjoy the view, but the wind has magic in it. I know that nobody puts their feet in the water, but it's a blessing in itself. I used to live here, and I'm coming back for all my shit. Yeah. All of our after BART stops running shenanigans, all of our heart-to-hearts around Lake Merced a million times, after all the little things we got away with stealing at Stonestown. After our standing in line for Jordans and driving our mother's car without licenses and being curious about the significance of why Tuesday at 12. I am coming back for our San Francisco, whether or not they let me across the bridge. I want to see it up close. I want to see us up close. I want to meet all of our mothers, hanging out the windows, looking left and right for us to come barreling down the blocks when it's time to come home. I want this for all of us. I want it to be how it was when I used to live here. Thank you.
I love seeing that piece again and seeing it at this point after all the conversation we've had. I can see all the different elements. You know, I see your grandfather's humor. I love this like up close that you talk about. Now, this piece has changed over time since you read it in 2018. It has a title change. It has even changed since it was published in the 2019 anthology. Can you talk about some of the different ways that your work, if you want to use this one as an example, has shifted through time and how the changing of the landscape of San Francisco informs the changing of your work?
Yeah, for sure. Yes. This piece has so many different versions. I think this piece may have the most edits. Many of my pieces have different lives and different versions and different edits, but this one might have the most. And it is because of my changing relationship to the city. Things in the city are disappearing so rapidly, and so they might be added into this piece or added into another piece because I don't want to forget them. My relationship to healing my own trauma also transforms the landscape of my pieces. Being with the hard pieces of this poem over time, my desire to want to read those parts out loud have changed because I've heard myself and I've healed that thing. And so I don't need to read it out loud as much anymore. Or there's something that I've healed and I'm really proud of that I want to make sure to add in there. And so as I kind of move through life, as I move through the city, as the city moves, my pieces change. And it does feel really special to kind of encounter these different versions of it in different places. It makes it feel like it's really alive. And I think it's definitely a more messy way, but it's my way, and it feels right to me.
So how do you decide when a piece is finished?
It's never finished. In many ways, a piece is done for a certain moment for me. So when I read this piece in 2018, it felt done. It felt complete. And then I revisited it for the anthology, and there were things that I missed, and things that I wasn't relating to so deeply. And so, that version came out of that. And then there was recently a version of it published on the poem of the day for the San Francisco Public Library, which was also different. And so the spirit of longing is there, and the spirit of telling my history of San Francisco from, this eyesight to this eyesight to this eyesight is still there. And they're finished for that context. They're finished for that moment.
What are things that you've noticed now, like during everything that's happened this year? Like, what is the kind of most poignant thing that you've noticed about the way that it looks to be a writer and an activist during this time, or even just your own approach to your writing?
Yeah. I've noticed my own struggle with perfection. I think as writers, we can be some of the most critical people of ourselves and our work. And so I've had to fist fight with perfection every time I get to the page in order to get there, and I've had to give myself really return to being like little Tanea at the page, just excited and curious about what's going to come out. Because otherwise perfection can really eat up my joy. It can really say that, this is what you have to speak out about, and this is when you have to do it, and this is how you have to do it, and you have to do it in this way that it resonates, and all of that. And the intention to connect is there, and I have to be with that, and I have to let go of the desire for it to be perfect. One, because perfection doesn't exist, but also because the page is always my place where I get to be brave, and I get to say things that are unfinished, and I get to work through things I'm confused about, and that is actually how I am honest and in community. That is actually how I keep myself accountable. That's actually how I get to dig deeper into a world and figure out more of what's at the core. So I've noticed myself doing that over and over and over again, and it can be really exhausting, but it's always really rewarding.
You talk about being in right relationship with oneself and the world.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what that means to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I think about joy, I always think about being in right relationship. I think often in the earlier days of experimenting with joy and doubting that I could have it for myself, I observed a lot of other things coming up to kind of snuff joy out. So there would be grief creeping in whenever I felt joy. There would be guilt creeping in, or shame creeping in. And over the years, I've noticed that when I'm in right relationship with myself, and when I'm in right relationship with my community, that I get to have joy a little bit longer. And so oftentimes it's like I am connected to what I need in the moment, taking care of myself. It's connected to how I'm relating to my neighbors, especially in this moment of mutual aid and mutual care. It's, am I doing work that's aligned with my values? Am I supporting folks in my community who are the most vulnerable, who are experiencing the most violence? And if I am doing those things, I'm experiencing joy, and I'm making sure that more folks have more joy and more justice more of the time. And that is when I find that I can experience joy in a different way. It's brighter, it lasts longer, I have more of it to share.
I love the idea of justice bringing more joy and grief, working through grief, bringing extended joy.
Yes.
Your writing takes many forms and many mediums. And I know that you have a novel that you can share with us.
Yes. Yes. So I've been working on my novel for over 5 years. It's my longest creative project, and it is the project that has changed shape and form so many times because I'm moving, I'm growing, it's moving and growing with me. So I'm going to read an excerpt from my upcoming novel, Sanctuary City. The piece that I'm going to read takes place when our main character, Jamila, reunites with her friend, Ceci, who she hasn't seen in a long time. It takes place in San Francisco in 2014, and it's about two friends coming together after a long time apart. Ceci went away for school. She got a big scholarship and moved away to New York the summer of graduation. Sometimes Jamila saw her post things on Facebook. Most of the posts were photos of Ceci out with her college friends. This one at the top of the Empire State Building, that one in Central Park. One winter, there were several photos of Ceci standing up to her knees in snow on her college campus. The look of overwhelming delight on Ceci's face made Jamila warm with something that mysteriously felt like anger, but she pressed the thumbs up button, liking the photo anyway. In Jamila's imagination, New York was a patchwork geography pieced together by movies and music. Ceci's photos helped Jamila fill in the blank of the place that was actually much, much bigger than San Francisco. Ceci's breaks from school were usually spent running errands with her mother and being paraded around to family and church members as the daughter who went off to school in New York. She never knew so many people still referred to it cheesily as the Big Apple. Being back home in the city had a way of showing her the cheap glue that held the place together. San Francisco seemed smaller each time she returned. When she saw Jamila's mother one day in the grocery store, she avoided eye contact with her altogether. She was shocked when Darlene swept her up into a hearty, tight hug. She too had heard about Ceci's big scholarship, about the Big Apple, inquired about the snow, insisted she call Jamila. Before they parted, Jamila's mother looked at Ceci with enough sincerity to make her cringe. "I'm proud of you. We all are." Ceci was afraid Jamila's mother might cry right there at the mouth of the frozen dessert aisle in Lucky's. Jamila's mother had aged. Her face, though unscarred, was heavied by time. In her face, Ceci projected the effects of fire, the loss of Malik, the loss of her mind. In the grocery store, Darlene's eyes looked both soft and attentive. It was both Ceci's curiosity about whether or not Jamila was changed by what happened and her desperation for relief from activities with her mother that motivated her to text Jamila to meet up. On the way to meet up with Jamila at the beach, Ceci obsesses over the temperature in her mother's car. She rolls the passenger window down, then her own. She tries out different formulas of all four windows lowered at different levels, then just the back two. She decides enough air has cooled the interior of the car, pulling up each button to close the windows as she enters the outer sunset. The entire break home, she's been struck by a refrain. Was it all like this? The repetition of the same 5 songs on the radio, the beach being so close to her mother's house, everything closing early on Sundays, the dinginess of the houses on her block. Has the city always been this small? This quiet, this sleepy? Jamila sits on a bench in the north lot. The view out over the water is clear and the wind isn't whipping like it usually does. Jamila wears a sweatshirt under a coat. Her hair is up in a bun. Her eyebrows are thinner than Ceci remembers. Ceci waves at Jamila after putting the car in park. She takes deep breaths, sighing as she collects her purse and coat from the passenger seat. Jamila comes over to hug her, smiling brightly. Up close, Jamila's eyes seem to be turned down at the edges. Ceci hugs Jamila back, relaxing into the blurred memory of their friendship so many years ago. They walk to the ocean's edge with their shoes on for as long as they can stand the sand. Jamila takes her shoes off first, teetering as one foot then the other comes up and each shoe sock is dislodged. The sun warms them between cycles of blowing wind picking up on the beach. Yellow and brown sea foam bubbles up on the shore some yards in the distance, leaving an impression that looks oddly like snow. Before Jamila talks, there's a sudden drop in Ceci's stomach. She fears for a moment that she has nothing to talk about. She fears that she's completely forgotten how to have a conversation. How is New York? Do they really talk like that? Jamila asks, miming stereotypical D-boy stances. She offers yo and shorty and mad crazy. Ceci is relieved with this speed of talk. I mean, some people do. Definitely not everybody, but some people do, for sure. Do you like it? I heard the clubs stay open until 4. Is that true? I really like it. I don't think I'll ever get used to the cold though. Last semester during finals, I was leaving the library to go back to my room and the temperature on my phone said 0 degrees. I was like, what the fuck is 0 degrees? Like, what does that even feel like? What did it feel like? Fucking cold. They laugh. Neither braves, putting her foot in the water deeper than the ankle, both already tense, imagining the impact of 0 degrees on their bodies. How's home? Ceci doesn't mean to ask it in a way that is so familiar, but their shared laughter situates her back in a time when they were close friends, when the city is still a bus map unfurling with places they'd never seen. Ceci can't determine exactly what the change is in the city, but she feels it. It makes her uneasy when her mother describes the change as something that is good for them. It is the same uneasiness felt when Ceci's mother calls her during the semester with updates about which boys in the neighborhood have died. It's the same uneasiness she feels when her mother waves at the police officers who park their K-9 unit squad car at the bottom of their hill. Returning home, Ceci stomachs the changes as if she is still in middle school. It is fitting and soothing to commiserate with Jamila about them. They whine about all of the closed stores and restaurants, some Ceci had not yet known about. They mourn the loss of certain bus routes. Jamila describes the disappearance of the 15 bus the way one talks about a murder mystery. They reminisce about all of the turning and swiveling of the accordion buses, all the fights they watched together at the bus stop, waiting for the 15 to take off near City College. Why were we so ridiculous? Ceci exclaims, recalling the embarrassingly short-sighted logic of her tween thinking. Jamila laughs, guessing several instances that Ceci might be conjuring in her head. She shrugs. We were kids. Kids are just dumb. They laugh as they walk along the water toward the bonfire pits. There's a seesaw fashioned out of 2 large balancing pieces of wood on the beach. Jamila shakes her head and rolls her eyes at the presence of it. Ceci swallows a bit of enthusiasm seeing Jamila's face, choosing not to ask her if she'd like to ride on it with her. You want to sit up here? Jamila gestures to a mass of large rocks overlooking the beach. Yeah. Ceci takes off her sweater to sit on, zipping her coat up to her chin. The sun is moving fast on its slope down. Ceci hesitates, giving her condolences, not trusting her own timing or delivery. Jamila senses the presence of the unsaid, so she pulls it down squarely to sit with them. You know Malik passed, right? Some days she could let it dance around, but it didn't feel like she had it with Ceci. Ceci nods. I saw. I'm so sorry. Ceci hugs her arms around her knees instead of around Jamila's shoulders. She was referring to the barrage of Facebook posts about Malik's death, the sharing of the Examiner News link with broken heart emojis. There are still many drafts of a condolence message for Jamila in Ceci's notes app on her phone. He was a baby. Ceci returns to memories of Malik in Jamila's home. She remembers him on long walks to Century 20 Daly City Movie Theater, the back way along the freeway. She remembers him as a shadow, walking independently behind them at the mall. She remembers how small he looked within downtown. He was an extra in their crew. He was Jamila's baby. And although he threatened to tell on them for every little thing, including withholding information from him, he never did. This is the Malik Ceci remembers. Despite the thumbnail of a Facebook profile photo with the man's facial hair and gold fronts that was tagged over and over again when the news broke. He was our baby. Jamila fights the urge to release the ache in her chest, filling her belly with air and letting it out sharply through flared nostrils. Ceci notices the strain. The sun is moving quickly. Ceci rubs Jamila's back with an open hand to help her fall apart. Much time passes before Jamila is forcing laughter about the mixture of sand and snot on her face. Ceci keeps her hand steadily on Jamila's back until Jamila moves forward to rub her nose on the inside of her sweater. They walk back to their cars, joking about who from the neighborhood is now hood rich and full of drama. Jamila surprises her with the depth of gossip and level of insight she has into the lives of the people they grew up with. She feels silly and simultaneously proud of the rumors and facts she unveils to Ceci. It is as if she is giving updates on the progress of a project they share. Ceci's horror and delight in her gossip feel like affirmation, feel like love. When they get to their cars, Jamila has a giddy feeling. She asks Ceci if she knows about the lights on Highway 1, about the rhythm and the timing of them. Do you need to go back home like right now, or do you have a little time? Jamila feels attached to sharing the secret with Ceci, but doesn't want to risk being pushy. Something about the route and green lights sounds familiar to Ceci, but she can't recall it. They roll along Highway 1, the continuum of sand and the spreading blue water blur on their right side. Ceci pulls out her phone to take a video. Jamila looks over at the screen while driving. Ceci's attention turns to the light as they approach it. It is red. She clenches in her seat as Jamila doesn't slow down. Jamila puts a hand on Ceci's shoulder. She rolls under the light and it turns green. The light turning from red to green is like an inside joke. Each time it turns as they roll through, they get a new kick out of it. When the highway curves toward Daly City, Jamila pulls over into a parking lot. Fighting the anxious clench at each light has sent Ceci into a nervous laughter that creates another layer of laughter aimed at herself. Has it always been like that? Ceci says. I don't know. I learned it from Malik's dad when we were kids. My mom used to love it. She would put her head out of the window. Malik was always mad she wouldn't let him put his little head out too. Jamila laughs fondly, thinking of the back of Malik's little head, in front of her in line, turned away from her looking at the BART map, up the stairs at the church before the baptism. There's a prickling inside of her nose that she twitches away. You want to try it? Jamila takes her seatbelt off before Ceci can reply. Ceci clambers over the middle console and into the driver's seat. She rolls out of the parking lot carefully, aware of her sensitivity driving someone else's car for the first time. She uses her blinker. She looks both ways despite the near empty road. She makes a U-turn. As they approach the red light, Jamila tells her to keep the car at 30 miles per hour. Ceci resists the urge to close her eyes as they near the light. It turns to green as they approach. She squeals between her teeth. As they approach another light, Jamila rolls down her window. The wind jacks through the car loudly. The light turns. Jamila takes off her seatbelt and raises her knees, folding them under her in her seat. She puts her head out the window. The hood of her sweater whips the back of her head. She extends out to her shoulders, upper body confronting the outside air. Ceci, slowing a bit but trusting the rhythm of the lights, leans over to hold the bottom of Jamila's sweater tightly in a fist. Jamila looks back with strands of hair orbiting her face and smiles.
Tell us about this book. The grief, especially in relation to Malik, feels very different than grief in the rest of your work. And even though we just excerpt, it has made me think of a hierarchy of grief, like who gets to remember, who gets to be remembered, and by whom, and kind of like in a way that you know, whose life is more important than others. I don't know if that's an element that comes out, but I can just, there was like an intimacy and a difference to the grief, which also makes me think, why fiction? So I'd love to hear more about this novel.
Yeah. So I started this novel in a moment when grief was ever present. And I needed a project, I needed a space where I could work with it, where I could bring some movement to something that felt really stuck. And so I started by writing all the hard things down. I started by writing out all the ways that grief wanted to be ritualized in that moment, which was not getting out of bed, having a hard time being present or feeling, having a hard time thinking, having a hard time taking care of myself. And I needed to express that in a way that I could see it. And I needed to give it a life outside of me. And that's how it started. And over the course of working on the book, there's been so much more nuance because my relationship with grief has changed. My relationship with healing and joy has also changed. And so I've had to add in those moments that are naturally there, but were kind of in the background that I maybe wasn't identifying as much, because sometimes when we're grieving or we're working through trauma, all the other things can feel extraneous. All the other things can feel like they're not important. But all the other things are so important. They're so integral. They're so central to ritualizing grief. I think I realized through working on this project that grief is really like a tribute to love. It's like, I love this person. I love this place. I love this idea. I love this state of being. And I've parted with it, usually in a way that was not by choice. And so what to do? And the answer was to write through it. The answer was to create a world where it was memorialized, where I could see myself working through it, where I could see myself on the other side of it. And in this place, it meant being on the other side of finishing a book. But the story itself, it does take place in San Francisco, but there are so many differences in my experience of grief and this character's experience of grief, and so many differences in the ways that she's working and moving through the world. But we're definitely friends. We're definitely in relationship with each other. Like, you know, yeah, I know these people. I know this story. I know this world, and it's been, I can see it so clearly. So much of writing this novel has been tapping into a channel that has already existed and just describing what I see. Yeah.
It's interesting to hear you talk about the previous piece and revision, and how you have changed and going back and actually changing the piece itself. And that's a nonfiction piece, you know, and sometimes we talk about nonfiction as a way of using one's personal experience to answer the most profound questions, or to like reveal and resist the most oppressive structures through one's own story. And then here you have a character or multiple characters in a book of fiction in which you're able to add nuance or add different things that you didn't experience. And so what do you find in that world, or the worlds of nonfiction and fiction? You know, do you, for folks who are out there, maybe who never cross genres, you're someone who has done it, you know, is there advice that you give, or just something about your experience with both that you could share?
Yeah. They both come pretty naturally to me in that when I'm writing nonfiction, I'm tapping into my superpower as an observer. Ever since I was like a very little person, I've been very observant. And some of this is hypervigilance. And some of this is just like really being like a highly sensitive person. But when I'm writing nonfiction, I am tapping into that experience of seeing things, of soaking up things, of watching things happen, and then giving it language, giving what I was observing language. And when I'm writing fiction, I'm doing that because the world does exist in here, and I'm moving through that world and saying, this is what it looks like. This is what these people are saying. And to some degree, everything I've ever experienced is pulling together these worlds that overlap, the real world and the fictional world. And so there are, different versions of conversations I've like eavesdropped on the train in this book for sure. There are like mixes of different people who are doing different things that make up these characters, and that's what makes them whole for me. That recognizing the complexity of myself and other human beings in the real world influences and informs the ways that my characters take up space on the page, because we're whole and we're weird and we're complex, and these characters also deserve justice and wholeness. And so it's an experiment in form, in nonfiction and in fiction. But I think it's based on the same skill set, which is like sitting, listening, observing, making space for what wants to come through.
Thank you. Going back to the themes of tonight, would you share what inspires you or where you're finding joy?
Yes. The young people in my life inspire me and bring me joy. I think about my youngest sister who's 12 and is embarrassed by everything, as is custom of being 12 years old. But she is one of my best teachers. I remember her being 4 years old and we were getting out of the car to go to something. It was like a post office or something that was closing, and we were in a hurry. And she was in the backseat of the car, just like on her imaginary phone. And I was like trying to get her out of the car, like, come on, we have to go. This place is closing. And she was like, I'm on the phone, And it was like so important that she be in that moment of imagination, of play. And I was the adult in that scenario that was like, real world, this is important, but I'm learning things like that all the time from the young people in my life, of like, play is important, imagination is important, having joy is important, having options to experience and feel and tap into knowing another way is important. And so whenever I can be silly and ridiculous and have fun, I am feeling most like myself. I'm like, oh yes, that's right. I don't have to, be the spokesperson of this thing, or I don't have to say the right thing at the right time, or I get to just be. That is, whenever I remember that, it feels good and it brings me joy.
I love the way that you're honoring not only those who have passed and elders, but also young ones and existence. And lastly, what advice do you have for BIPOC artists now who are living through this particular historical moment and this particular version of oppressive society and a pandemic, and and trying to juggle joy and grief.
Yeah.
Or joy.
I have this advice for myself, which is tap into community and connection that feeds me. Be open to that not being on the internet. Be open to that happening like in places that surprise me, with family members, with old friends. And to give myself care and grace. Give yourself care and grace. We're living through a very like impossible moment in so many ways, and our bodies and ourselves demand care that is in acknowledgement of that work that we're doing all day just to survive, just to keep ourselves okay, just to keep our loved ones okay. So to really treat ourselves with that care, and to be in as deep of that connection as we can, as it nurtures us.
I want to thank you so much for that. I want to thank you for sharing yourself and your work and your life, and everything that you have tonight. And I encourage people to find you, check you out, follow you, and just I wish you so much care and grace and love. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalie.
And happy 415 day.
Happy 415 day.